Great. Good. Hi, Sarabi. How are you?
Good. How are you, Andy?
I'm great. It's great to see you again. I'm just going to wait to make sure that we're getting everybody into the room. And that's all great. And just let people come in. Say hi, everybody, when you come in. Well, what a treat we've got for today. We've got the amazing Sarabi Venkatesh here with us, and we've spoken before, of course, and sadly, we were supposed to get together a little while ago, but COVID hit and on all these kind of things. So thank you, everybody, for being patient. But all good things do come to those that wait, and this is going to be a great conversation today. So that's great. Everybody's convening. That's good. Good to see everybody. Yeah, and sorry for the little break we've had in the chats to say hi, Kim. Great to see you. But we've got some amazing conversations coming now, and this is the first one, and it's going to be a corker. Going to be a corker, as we say in the UK. Great. Right, let's start then. Yeah, hi everybody. Good to see you. Let's think about starting off then with hearing a bit about your story. I think it's always a good place to start, and to hear about how you navigated your way through to where you are now, and your understanding of what you do, and the influences you've had, and yeah, a bit of your backstory.
Yeah. So I actually didn't grow up with dogs at home, but I did find a couple of streety friends along the way. And then, I think after I got married, and I sort of, my husband and I were sort of putting our home together, I think we both knew that we wanted to have dogs in our house, but I think we were very unsure of when. And then sometime in 2018, we decided to adopt our first dog, Lucy, who's still with us. And that was obviously a game changer. We had no clue what we were doing. We were your typical first-time pet parents. I don't even think the idea of dog parenting was a concept we resonated with then. I think it was very, typical ownership kind of attitude. Which obviously evolved along the way. And I think a couple of months into getting Lucy, I think we felt that, we definitely wanted to bring home a second dog. We wanted to be a multi-dog household. And then in 2020, we adopted our second dog, Mutton. And interestingly, so I'm a big foodie. Which also got me down the whole path of nutrition for dogs. But both my dogs are named after Indian foods. So the part of the country that I'm from, Lucy is actually deep fried bread. And you usually have it with a lamb or a mutton curry. And that's a staple. And so I have a Lucy and I have a mutton because they go together as a dish. So that sort of talks a little bit about how obsessed I am with food. And so I think that, obviously they're the reason why I do what I do. They've continued to sort of, really inspire and influence, and I think just show me how to do what I need to do, And so I think I owe different parts of my journey to each of them. I think with Lucy, it started off, she's responsible for my journey into dog nutrition. With Mutton, she's responsible for my journey into dog behavior and getting me into, my association with Bhaks and Sindoor. And so I think I feel very fortunate to be in the spot where I have these two incredible teachers and mentors with me. And so, so I've been, formally sort of working as a nutrition consultant now for about a little over a year. I did my nutrition diploma back in 2020, and then I was sort of working with different pet parents in a very pro bono kind of capacity. And then I decided to take a leap of faith last year, quit my corporate job, and said, okay, this is what I want to do. And I think, again, it came from a very strong place of wanting to build a legacy of what I had learned from my dogs while they were around and with me. And so that it could be this kind of, this really like fruitful relationship where I'm learning what I am learning from them, sharing it with other pet parents, learning more and coming back to them with that. And so that's been a little bit about the journey. Yeah.
Isn't it, I think when we allow ourselves to continue learning from another, whether that's the dog, whether that's our mentors, and from our clients, and staying in that kind of humble space, it's such a great space to be, because we constantly learn and we keep building things up. With and also, you know, having that influence with Sindor, how did that come about? Was that just by chance? Had you heard of her work? Had you gone down a different route first? How did that connection come?
Yeah, so I think sometime early 2020, before we adopted Mutton, we were fostering another dog for a brief while, and it was the first time we had a second dog into our space. And I think that I felt very ill-equipped to manage things at home, manage their interactions, manage their dynamics. You know, this was also a dog who had come from an extremely neglectful, traumatic background. Her trauma was very, very visible in behaviors. And I don't think I did a very good job of responding to that and supporting her through it. And I think that I continue to feel very inadequate and guilty about that. And so when I knew that I wanted to bring home a second dog, I also knew that I had to build capacity in myself to know how to do this. And what I was very clear about what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to go down the path of obedience training. I didn't want to go down the path of the philosophy where the human has to be the alpha and has to the whole power dynamic. I didn't want to go down that path at all. And I think I felt very strongly in my gut that I wanted to learn how do you actually just communicate with dogs, and how do you build a relationship that's based on connection. And I didn't want to, I wanted to keep it really simple, really. And I think that I happened to sort of come across the Barks page on social media. And, this is also at a time when I think that I was being bombarded with messages of a certain way to build relationships with dogs, right? And so I actually did feel that I was probably crazy to think that there is another way to do this, because it seemed like there wasn't. And I was probably being a big softie by thinking that, you can build relationships and you can coexist with dogs in the space with just connection and kindness and love. And so when I came across the Barks page, I was like, oh my God, here is someone who gets it. And so I think I immediately signed up. I did the short-term course. While I was doing the short-term course, we adopted Mutton. She came to the house, and then of course, Mutton came with her own baggage and trauma. And so I think the Barks way sort of really became something that I started practicing actively, and I saw results. And then I decided that I definitely have to do the back bed diploma. And so that's been a journey, and I'm very, very close to the finish line. Very, very close. So yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. I think hearing you talk there and hearing the passion with which you connect those bits that are foundational for your story, of course. There must have been a big part of you that was even in your corporate world before, there must have been that side of you looking to connect to more, looking to find something on a very almost spiritual and emotional level. And I think dogs give us that sometimes. We don't even know we were looking for it until we find it. And then when you have somebody as amazing as Sindor come along and help unlock that, because we can only really truly hear if we know what that language is. And I think that's important for us. You mentioned about Lucci, about she was the dog that you really thought about nutrition for. So as a first-time dog owner, right, to even start thinking, right, I want to get this nutritional stuff right. Where did that come from for you then? Where did that thought process start? Is that because you were already very mindful of nutrition and the role of food and the importance of food?
Yeah, no, I don't think it came from that place, because I don't think I was very mindful of nutrition prior to Lucci. But I think what happened was, when she came home, we followed advice that adoption coordinators gave us, that the vets gave us, that our local pet stores, for example, gave us, and they all recommended feeding her kibble, right? And that's what we thought is what dogs eat. And so it was either kibble, or it was this combination of bread or milk and eggs or something like that, and so kibble it was. But what was so interesting was that as soon as Lucci got home, she rejected the kibble. And we went through, days of trying to find what is the right brand, what is the right flavor. And she would just not eat it. And even when she ate it, she didn't enjoy it. I could see that she was eating it because she wasn't being given a choice. And I also felt like, I think her whole attitude towards me really was, I finally have a home, and is this the best that you can do? And so I think I was really pushed into finding alternatives for her. And so I said, okay, I'm going to start just cooking for her. And so I started looking up, what human foods can we feed dogs? And this is also when there were these constructs of human and dog food. And I realized that basically you could pretty much feed almost everything, right? And so I started very actively cooking for her. And she enjoyed those meals. And I think two things happened as a result of that. I think one is, I went down the path of also seeing how she was thriving on a fresh food diet. She came in with, a couple of skin issues. She came in with just general low immunity. She came in with a few gut issues. I think some of that resolved over a period of time. I myself engaged with a canine nutritionist to get very specific guidance for her. And I was just mind blown at the fact that this could be a full-fledged profession. And I think the more I started seeing results with her, the more I felt like that was something that I wanted to do, because again, it came from a space of, oh my God, I have experienced so much joy and so much positive impact from this route that I have to share this with others. I think the second thing that happened as a result of this was I was really struggling to connect with Lucci. Again, it came from a place of, I was a first time pet parent. This is the first time I had a dog in my care. I didn't know how to interact with her. I didn't know how to engage with her. I think I was getting a lot of messaging about how you're supposed to, keep dogs active at all points in time, engage them constantly, otherwise they'll get bored, they'll get anxious. And it just seemed like I had to do a lot to, just connect with her. And I don't think that was something that came very easily to me. And even the times that I did do that, I think I just felt very out of character and, not authentic. And so what happened when I started sort of cooking for her and when I started making this food for her, is that it actually became a way for me to connect with her, right? It became a way to establish this love language. And I think that now that I look back at it, like, of course, like, I have a light bulb moment, because food is really my love language, right? Like, I love to cook for people. I love when family friends come over for me. And I think, Andrew, you and I were chatting about this with reference, I think, to your mom as well, the last time we spoke, that, the sign of what makes me feel really happy is when I have people at home and they say that, oh my God, we can't eat anymore. And I'm like, no, there's space for just a little bit more, right? And I think that's my language. And so I think I also felt suddenly I felt very secure in being able to extend that language to another being I'm sharing space with, right? And here is another being who loves this, who's reciprocating in so many different ways. And so I think that was a real game changer for my relationship with her. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, because, we all do it. Time restraints and everything else. It's like, oh, the dog needs feeding, bung it in the bowl, off we go. What you're adding there is actually this deep connection through the ritual of and the joy of providing food for another, which we all can recognize. I love when Kieran, my husband, and I have the chance to have a bit of time together. I love getting in the kitchen, cooking something special and that kind of thing. And you're extending this to the dog. And I think this is really important. And this, many of us, I think, can relate. I do wonder whether here in the UK, especially, some of the rituals around food, we're losing them. When I was growing up, I was expected to sit at a table for dinner. We were expected as a family, doesn't matter where we were, to get around that dinner table on us for a Sunday lunch, because that's the big thing here for us in the UK, Sunday lunches. And I've got great fond memories of that. As you say, it is that connection that we had. And dear Sandy's in the group. Hi, Sandy Sharma. We talked about this because, we kind of joked that if ever our mothers had met in heaven, because they're both up there now, sadly, who would be the host and who would be the guest? Because my mother was the one who was like, yes, there's always room for more. I used to say to my friends when they'd come over and mum was saying, do you want anything to eat? Do you want anything? And I said, just say yes. Best to say yes. But they love putting on a spread. They love just kind of providing. And why shouldn't we extend that to our dogs and that relationship? So I think there's two strands we need to think about here then as we go on. And I'll let you choose which one you want to go through first, because there's two bits for me. There's one, and they're both important. One is the relationship we build through food, because that's what I'm hearing you talking about. I think there's a lot to think about there. And the other side is the important role of nutrition. I think when we've discussed before, I think that there's a little joke, isn't there, that the three things you should never bring into a conversation: religion, politics, and what to feed your dog. Because but actually we need to move away from that and actually think, well, it doesn't really matter about what you feed. And obviously people have different budgets and different abilities and all sorts of things. It's about just thinking about the nutritional quality of that based upon those metrics. So which one do you want to go through to first?
Yeah, I think I'm partial to the first one.
Yes,
maybe we can
cool. We'll come back
talk
to
a
the
little bit
nutritional
about
one.
that first.
Yes, let's do that then.
Yeah,
so what I love about this then is, so you're already setting the scene really about how important food is, and remembering for us how important food is for us. We have to eat because of biological need. And if it was that simple, we wouldn't have these rituals around food. They wouldn't even be there. We'd just be doing the kind of getting a packet out of the cupboard and adding water to it like they do in the sci-fi films. As a species, regardless of where you are in the world, one thing that unites us all is the rituals around food and how important they are to bring people together, that notion of breaking bread and sharing. And that has an important effect, doesn't it, about the way that we've ended up using food in relation to dogs?
Yeah, I think it's complicated, right? Because I think some of our relationship with food and dogs perhaps also has foundations in how our own individual relationships with food has also evolved, right? I think today we see, as a result of social media and I think just conversations around fads and trends and etc., that we do have a very problematic relationship with food in general, right? It's not like all of us have very healthy relationships with it. I think it's not easy when we're constantly bombarded with images and ideas and messaging around food that makes you lose weight, food that makes you put on weight, and just this whole diet culture. So I feel like there is so much toxicity right there that I think that unknowingly perhaps we've also imbibed some of that, and maybe that translates to some of our relationships with dogs as well. And I think just to I think just to sort of talk a little bit about what we were sharing before this chat, I think the idea that you recognize how important food is for another being. And then I always think that you have a responsibility, right? You can use that knowledge very responsibly. You can use that knowledge to build connection. You can use that knowledge kindly. You can use that knowledge with compassion, or you can use it to exert certain control. You can use it to exert certain power. You can use it to, engage in this sort of power game, right? And I think that that's what we kind of see. That's what we see different groups of people doing, right? We have people who do the first way, but we also have people who do the second way. And I think that one that could potentially tell us a little bit about our own individual relationships with food, but I think it can also tell us a lot about how are we making dogs feel? What is the relationship that we're building between dogs and food right there, right? So yeah.
That's important, right? And it makes you think about a lot of things. That it wasn't that long ago that a main narrative from the positive community was if the dog wasn't engaging with the training enough to actually hold back on their food, so they were hungrier. And there are still some people who say that now, who are on the positive side of things, because they see the fact, well, we are using food, so therefore it's okay. But that dog is, that primary need is being connected to something that the dog must do, and we can, if we're not careful, end up treating food as some part of a transactional process. And I think that's the thing that we need to question more, really, about what that is. And especially when we think about from the very early age, the dogs who are, especially when we're using a lot of food and a lot of reinforcement, what we're connecting to that young brain regarding their ability to access something that's quite primary.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that when, we talk about a couple of different things, right? We talk about this idea of withdrawing food in certain situations. We also talk about other behaviors where we're either getting really handsy with food, or we're choosing to, hand feed dogs in different ways, right? For whatever different reasons. And I think a conversation that I was having with, my sister, and I think even my husband at some point in time, was, flip it for yourself, right? Imagine if you're sitting next to me and you're eating your dinner, and I constantly put my hands in your food, right? Or I constantly hover around you, I'm really excitable around you, just create a lot of noise around you. Or imagine if, you don't do something for me and I say, I'm not going to serve you dinner, right? That's what you get for not doing something. That's a very, very painful experience. I think we don't talk about it enough, but I think it's a very painful experience, right? There is a lot of, you're withdrawing something that's very important, something that, something that's meaningful for someone from them. And that's a very painful experience, right? I think it also builds just so much insecurity around food. I think it builds a very poor trusting relationship with food, and even the human at the other end of the relationship, right? I think that I saw a lot of this with Mutton when we got her home, where I think, she did come from an extremely neglectful background, and I think she was so one, I don't think that she had access to proper nutrition, but also I think that there were problematic behaviors around food with her, and so the first couple of months she would just gobble her food down, because there was a certain frenzy about the way that she was eating food. It was almost like she wasn't sure that she was going to get another bowl of food, right? And that's painful to watch, but that's also extremely painful for anybody, including our dogs, to experience, right? This idea that something that I need to survive, something that I need to thrive, is not going to come to me, or can be taken away from me at any point in time, is painful. And I think that maybe we can create more space to sort of talk about that, because I think that perspective often gets missed. Yeah, I might have rambled on a little bit, Andrew.
No, no, I think it's great. And I think, well, let's build on that a little bit more, because I think this is important. And, these are just questions and things to really step back and do, because it's not a case of, not using food. It's not a case of it's just thinking about what relationship do we build using something that we talked about off air that you said, part of our building a positive relationship with food. What relationship are we building up with food with our dogs? We went out recently, and my husband and I, we took the dogs, we had a picnic, and normally we're fighting the dogs off, right? Because we're like, no, you've had your bit, this is our bit, we just want to eat our picnic in peace. And we said to each other, if we want a picnic in peace, we go out without the dogs, then let's just take some stuff out and share. And they were so different, and it was a beautiful moment, actually. It was just nice. We were just sharing, but obviously it was dog stuff that the dogs could have, of course, but and it was a really lovely moment, and it felt a very relational instead of transactional. We weren't asking for anything. We didn't say sit first or anything like that. We were like, you can have this bit, you can have this bit. And even with Molly, who's very much, I've got to have everything first, she's a diva. She was like, no, I get this, we're going to wait. And interestingly, what was really interesting for me is with 2 Labradors, we've got 3 dogs, 2 Labradors, all up there if you haven't seen them. The change in their drooling, right? I said to Kieran, because normally the 2 Labradors, as soon as they think something's coming, the floodgates open. But it was almost like they were more mindful in that experience, because the dribbling had stopped. They were like, okay, I'm waiting for my bit. And am I having some of that? No, that's okay. It was just a nice experience. I thought I'd share that, because I think this is the thing about what we do. We lose that opportunity if we're sometimes with our dogs.
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with that so much, because I remember when I started my journey with parks, one of the things I wanted to get support on was Lucci constantly whining when I'm eating food, right? How do I address that? How do I manage that? And I remember Sindoor in one of her conversations just saying, sharing your food is absolutely okay. When you want to share your food, you share your food. And when you don't want to share your food, you gently communicate boundaries, but it's absolutely okay. And I think that I was actually waiting for someone to give me permission to do that. Because again, there is just so much misinformation about, the human, the food, and the relationship with the dog, right? And so I think that it's been such an incredible lesson for me, because I think you were again talking about rituals for food. So my dogs and I have a monthly pizza party ritual where once a month I'm home alone, and so I get pizza, I order pizza, and I enjoy it, and my dogs enjoy the crusts, and it's our little thing, and I love it. I absolutely love it, right? And I bask in the joy of knowing that this is something that I share with my dogs, that my dogs share this with me, and it's something that they just know they're going to have access to, right? And I think there's an incredible amount of security and safety in knowing that, which I think is again very, very important for just well-being as an overall piece. Yeah.
But this is the you talk about food as that kind of love language, and it does seem to elevate us. We were talking off air, as a species, evolutionarily, there came a point where one family unit and another family unit started to share food. It's like, well, I've got some coming in there, and underpinning that, when we started from an evolutionary point of view, looking at cooperative care and how that's how we became social, and it's almost embedded in the notion of being social, that thing of sharing. And interestingly, I caught my husband recently doing what I do, so I thought it was a me thing, but it's a him thing as well. So we've got 3 dogs, and if we end up in the kitchen, we've got like a child gate into the dining room. It's a bit open plan otherwise. And if there's just one dog happens to be in there for whatever reason, we go and let that one dog come in and it can have extra grain, right?
Yeah.
And I caught Kieran doing it with one of our dogs, and I do the same thing. And the thing is, we do it with all our dogs. It just happens to be the dog that happens to be there, right?
At different times, yeah.
Yeah, so it's that special moment, isn't it, of how we're going to just communicate through food, actually. And especially with a lot of the dogs that I work with who, are clearly have experienced trauma or are definitely in a traumatized state. And they come into the home, and I see a lot of pressure put on through food. And I think this is a big thing we have to recognize, especially on our side of the fence, that you can force through food just as much as you can force through anything. You can make a dog do something by food, and actually, I think for a lot of these dogs, the free provision of food without expectation behind it is a big part of having that kind of trauma-informed approach, I think.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? I also think that, food's just such a basic need, right? Like there's no argument to it. You need it to survive, right? And imagine having to sort of work for something that is basic, or imagine having to earn something that feels basic, right? And again, I think that there's been so much conversation, even in the group, right, about secure attachment, for example. And I think, and this is obviously in context of food, but also I think the same logic applies, right? Imagine having to earn connection from someone whom you love, right? There is something painful about that, right? There is something that feels this is not okay, right? And so I think I sort of apply that same logic to food and dogs because it is really basic. And so, if you put it in the context of human beings as well, imagine if I have to score a certain amount of, score a number of marks or score a certain grade to earn a decent meal, right? Like that doesn't fit right at all. And so I feel like, I was
going to say we can all relate to that. Many of us as adults still have painful memories of how certain foods were forced on us or was put through a transactional process, a lot of it on that pre-MAC principle of, well, you can't have that or you can't do that until you have that. And I get that. You can see why our parents might do that because you've got to eat food because I've cooked or anything else. But what are we teaching that young brain then about the connection through food, about agency, about choice, about being able to experiment with food in a way that feels comfortable? Because guess what? Many of us grow up still not liking broccoli or greens or Brussels sprouts or rice pudding or whatever it is that we were kind of made to have to sit through.
And I also think that, and again, right, like I'm sort of still reading up about it and still learning about it. So I'm not gonna speak to this with authority per se, but I think we're also teaching, I think, dogs, and again, you can equate this to children, to not listen to their body, right? And not listen to what they're feeling inside their body. And so, for example, for me, I just find the idea very, very painful of a dog feeling hungry, but not being able to access food because they're not doing something that they're being asked to do. Right. And so I think the idea that what you're feeling in your body needs to be overridden by an external piece is also problematic, right? It's also teaching perhaps dogs to suppress what they're feeling or to move away from that. And that again is taking away agency, right? That's again taking away what they can choose in that moment.
100%. And I think anybody who heard the presentation at the dog behavior conference yesterday with the case study that I gave, we used food, and as far as food was freely available, but because this dog has a bite history, has no contact with the outside world until they were rescued from Spain. So 6 years old, 5 years either chained up or in a compound, 2 years without any human contact. So it's quite an extreme case. We had to make sure as we were moving forwards that this dog was learning to feel safe, emotionally safe, socially safe, as well as, you know, kind of safe in the environment.
Yeah.
And actually, if we'd have used a lot of food, we would have muddied those waters about how that dog was actually feeling and connecting to things. We had an experience recently with a rescue that I kind of help kind of remotely, just though talk about things, but they've got a dog who was in and they did a lot of food training, and they went in and the kennel person saw an emotional response from the dog that they thought, oh, at last the dog's really pleased to see me. And they went to pet the dog and the dog bit them, because that response was to the fact they had their food pouch with them.
Mm.
Because that was the only thing that that dog was kind of connecting to, was through the food, you see, rather than so there was a misinterpretation there of that dog actually making a safe social connection. So I think we have to just consider these things. And this notion of forcing through food, you know, we can very easily. We have to be mindful of that as practitioners, of course, turning up. You know, I like to feed from the environment. So it's there, you can have it or not have it. You know, I'm not going to treat in front and say, come on. And a lot of caregivers fall into that little error, don't they? Where they give the treat to the guest and then the guest gives the treat to the dog. I think to myself, you know, if somebody was really hungry or very in need of some money, but they were also very sensitive or unsure or anxious, and I say, well, and I'm trying to be helpful, I'm like, here's the money. I've now forced them into my space to have to get it. It's tough. So we just have to be mindful of these things, I think, about how we build this up, and especially for young dogs. You know, with Molly, you know, she came to us quite young. We used hardly any food. Actually, I say it's not about not using food. Food's great, but I didn't want to just be trying to support behaviors because I felt that's what I wanted. I wanted to try and let her show us what it is that she needed to connect, and she could have the food anyway, because that reinforcement, always talk in those terms, is most powerful when that dog has an innate feeling of that worked for me. And actually, I see a lot of memes which support positive reinforcement that say, you know, use food because dogs do what works for them. We run a risk sometimes of just actually that should say dogs do what works for us, because we're using the transactional element of the food to get it.
Yeah.
We're just going to think about it. So it's not about absolutes or rights or wrongs. It's just asking these questions about the relationship we build with food, especially from a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think very much like you said, right? I think it's also about just, I think, being aware that the presence of food can give you very different behaviors, right? And that's not necessarily addressing or responding to what the dog actually needs in that moment. And so I think, you know, even in the example that you're talking about where the dog bit this particular individual, it is that, right? I don't know, and I could be wrong, but I see that happen so much where we're using food to get certain behaviors without really addressing what the root cause of those behaviors are. And the root cause could lie in exactly, you know, your example. It could lie in the need for feeling safe. And food can help with that, but when done slightly differently, and when done again with the, you know, with the pillars of choice, with the pillars of agency, with the, you know, with managing our own behaviors around food, and the kind of relationship that we're building. And you know, something that comes to mind, I think, when you were talking about your case studies, were when we got Mutton home, she showed extreme resource guarding around bones and food. And a popular advice that we got, and perhaps we also got this advice because she is a pit bull type dog, was that if she refuses to share the bone with you, or if she refuses to let you touch the bone, you take the bone away completely and don't give it back to her, right? She has to learn to share. And I cannot tell you how uncomfortable that advice made me, because, and again, it made me uncomfortable for a lot of different reasons. But again, I drew a lot from my experience of teaching children in low-income communities when I was thinking about this, because you can't meet scarcity with more scarcity, right?
Yes.
You can meet scarcity with abundance. And it takes time to shift that mindset. It takes time to shift an individual, including dogs, from that scarcity mindset to a mindset where they feel safe and secure and know that there is abundance available for them. And it takes us to show up in more ways than one consistently, to make them feel that way and to make them believe that that's true of their home and their relationship with us. And so that's something I think a lot about, for sure.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think you're right. And I think what you were saying before also about the fundamental question, I think it underpins actually, Sarabi, what everything we're talking about, not just you and I, but all the conversations that are going on, a lot of the conversations in the dog center care group, is that it isn't about training, isn't about using food, it's about being more mindful about two things. One, what the dog was trying to communicate in the first place, especially in the notion of safety and feeling relief or whatever it is that they need. And secondly, if we're going to look at the behavior change of another, that term behavioral modification, we use it a lot. It's quite a free one, but actually it's a term I feel really uncomfortable with, because what it implies is I am going to turn up and I'm going to make the behavior of another change. Yeah. But that is kind of what we do, and that's kind of what how things are. So we have a huge responsibility to ensure then that animal is still able, whatever animal it is, to get the safety and relief they seek. Not just getting them to give another behavior that we might find appropriate and use something as primary as food in order to get it. Because that's a double whammy. If the dog still doesn't feel safe, still doesn't get relief, so can't even get the relief they might have got. A lot of these behaviors that we might see as challenging, there's probably an element of relief from it. That's why they do it. So not only can they not do that now, and potentially the feeling of not feeling heard, but also they're having to think, well, I need the food though, so I need to do that. And it's tough. And I think it's just a thing that we have to think about. And I went through a long time of unpicking this in my brain. I think the advantage of coming relatively new to things and having a great outlook like this is a lot of my colleagues have been looking at things through a certain lens for a long time. And it's hard then. We have to all go through this period of reappraisal and think, I need to ask some questions. And I think that's another thing that underpins these conversations is, why can't we ask questions? Why can't we, why do we have to sit and think, okay, that perceived wisdom shouldn't go unchallenged? We should just think, well, let's think about it then. Is this actually supporting the dog's needs? Or is it because we've got really geeky about the science of behavior change?
Yeah.
For behavior change's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, right, and I think another example that comes to mind is, Lucy has very specific preferences with food, right? And she prefers certain textures. She prefers certain foods over other foods. And some of it has to do with, obviously just her preference, but some of it also has to do with her just, I think, listening to her body in terms of what she needs, right? And all of our dogs carry that wisdom, right? They do carry that wisdom. And so, there are times when she will leave some parts of her food, and there are times when she will lick her bowl clean. And I think that for someone else who's looking at her and her eating habits, I think it's very easy for them to label her as a really fussy eater and then go down a very, very dangerous path, right? But I think that, again, because, I think I have this whole belief of food being a love language. I feel like food is a connection with other beings. I think for me, this is just information, right? This is just her saying, listen, something about this meal didn't work for me. I don't like it. I don't want it. Something about this meal worked for me fabulously. And I think it is my responsibility as her caregiver to be responsive to that information and to make changes. And I feel like, I think that's also a trust building process. And I think back to, something that you were talking about, being force fed certain kinds of foods. And, if you were force fed something, you didn't like it, you didn't feel good about it, you voiced it, but somebody didn't hear it and they gave it to you repeatedly. Right, it does lead to certain breakdowns, in that relationship. And so I think there's it is a lot about how you approach those behaviors. It is a lot about, I think, if we suspend this notion that our dogs are out to get us in some ways or the other, or are trying to sort of take us for a ride, or take us for granted, and are just really acting as individual beings, just like very much like we do, and kids do. I think it can really shift perspectives for us.
That's so much, but also big part of what you just said there has just made my brain go ping, right? I love these conversations with people who are like yourself, who are willing to come and share their passion and their knowledge, because it's fundamental, actually. And I've not really thought of it in this term and this way. So thank you for gifting that for me right now, because when you think about it, like you said, dogs have to have had instinctively over a millennia the ability to try and find the food that they feel would be nutritious, that they feel would suit them in locations that they felt safe, and seeking the things out that they feel that they needed nutritionally, because you can't survive otherwise. And I think, how many times does a dog who doesn't want the food in front of them, as you say, is then classed as fussy? How many times do we either think we either have the advice of, well, just take it up, put it down later, if they're hungry enough, they'll eat it? That's really common advice. Or how often do people then start thinking there must be a GI issue here, gastrointestinal issue, we better get this done, better get that done, get a vet. I'm not saying that isn't important to think about.
Yeah.
But I think about with Arthur, our older dog, as he's got older especially, he has become more particular about his food, which is a different way of framing it rather than fussy. And I think we need to, this is the beautiful thing about connecting through food then, because you get that feedback. Bunging a bowl down on the floor and whether they eat it or don't eat it is very binary.
Yeah.
But experimenting with different foods, and there's so much misinformation about foods, I think, which doesn't help, especially for a caregiver.
Yeah.
So that's really hit home for me, and really hit home for me. And I think this is such a fascinating area, isn't it? When you think about it, then actually, when we're starting to think about the emotional experience of another, I've not really explored it in my head that much about the food side of it. I've thought about food as in quality and making sure it's nutritious, but on whose terms is it nutritious? That's the I just got from that. Wow, so that was powerful for me. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. So we are coming up to this. So we've got a bit of time. We've got about 10 minutes though at the end. Let's just talk a bit about nutrition.
Yeah.
What is the areas when you think about giving advice on nutrition? I'm guessing then there is the kind of on a piece of paper what we should be looking for, but on this piece of paper is the dog's preferences and their likes and dislikes and their tolerances and everything else.
Yeah. So I obviously won't get into too many details about it, but the way that I like to sort of approach this is essentially saying that obviously your dog needs to have variety in their diet. The more you can incorporate fresh foods, the better it is. And within that variety, I think you have to make space for what your dog enjoys and what your dog doesn't like. right? And what your dog enjoys, do more of that. What your dog doesn't like, I mean, if it's absolutely critical to their health and well-being, sure, let's figure out different ways to incorporate that. But if it's not that super critical, let it go. It's absolutely fine, right? And so I think that, you know, again, I think dogs are listening to their bodies. I think their preferences and, you know, choices change over a period of time. And so I think it's just important to, I think, fundamentally keep that in mind. And I think that not get so prescriptive about food, you know. I think I've been there in my journey where I've been extremely prescriptive in food for my own dogs. And I do think that I lost the joy of just putting together a meal for them, and it became this chore. It became something that was inducing incredible amount of stress and guilt and pressure. And I think that, you know, of course, there are certain guidelines and there are certain requirements, and yes, you follow that, but it's all in balance. I think it's okay to not, you know, be as prescriptive as it's made out to be.
Yes, and I think to break away some of the expectational norms, I think, and you know, if anybody's listening who they feed their dog kibble, for example, and the dog seems to like it, that's great. And I think, you know, even there you can think about something we do without even thinking about it, actually. And this fits with your previous point: how much food we give our dogs when we go out for walks. And that fits this notion of finding food everywhere. It happens to come from us, but and even with our own dogs, we tend to want to try and feed from the floor rather than, you know, so they can have it or not have it. But I think you know, thinking about how you feed your dog, when you feed your dog, who says that dogs have to eat at these set times out of a bowl? You know, that is something we've just done. It's that kind of perceived wisdom. It's convention. But all these things, that variety that you're talking about, is not just in obviously the food, but also in what we do. And if you do happen to feed kibble, I've got some clients who, you know, from a socioeconomic point of view, they struggle. They struggle with their own. So I've got a client at the moment who struggles with her own care. Actually, she has her own care challenges, and you know, so it's easy for her. But I've been trying to persuade her, and she has started to put some extra bits in with the food, the things that you do, because then it doesn't feel like you're preparing something. So there's lots of different ways of looking at this, isn't there, I think?
Yeah, I think two things that I sort of really ground myself in. And again, this is also something that I'm constantly reminded by through this incredible, you know, community of people that I work with. One is that every dog is different. And so it's so important to keep that in mind and remember that what works for one dog may not work for another dog. And while we have these guidelines and while we have, you know, recommendations on what to feed and how to feed, we have to tweak them for each and every dog for it to make sense for the dog in where they are, right? I think that's one. I think the second one that I hold is for caregivers, which is that everybody is on their own journey, and so this idea that you have to move from A to Z immediately is an unfair expectation. It's an unreasonable expectation, right? So you're on your journey. I think, as at least for me as a professional, I feel like my responsibility and role lies in giving you accurate information, helping you make sense of it, and seeing how much of it you can implement. And so if we can take baby steps, that's progress right there. It's okay. We don't need to get to the Z point right away, but can we at least move from A to B and then slowly and steadily sort of move forward? But I think this demand that sometimes can be placed on caregivers to immediately switch positions is very harsh. And like you said, may not necessarily take into account their own individual positions and challenges.
I need everybody on the planet now to hear those words, because I think it's important, because there is an element of absolutism that's creeped into our community a little bit. You know, and whilst the rationale behind whatever it is, you know, that must be done like this, could be sound, it becomes unattainable to those who are not there. And if we have to educate in the way that you are, and this is what I try to do myself, in a way which is like, let's ask some questions, let's think about things, and then leave it to the other to think, what does that mean for me? What does that mean that I need to do? I see some of the conversations that we have around, you know, how we do certain dog sports, the kind of talks around food, the talks around crates, all these kind of things. I think it's important that we try and educate in a way so people can make an informed choice, and that has to be theirs, and they shouldn't feel shame because they're not there yet. But if they make that little change, then invariably, when you start a longer path, you will end up going to the same destination. We have to think about how we educate to make sure we're not even allowing people to step on the path the other end yet. So I think that's a wonderful, beautiful sentiment, and it's a great way for us to finish our hour. That flew by, didn't it? I've got that. So looking at the kind of comments in the group, it's been really well received. And how can people find out more about your work, darling?
Well, I can add my website details.
Yes, we'll make
social
sure.
media pages. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, send me those over, ping them over, and then we can get them in chat. But also, when I make a little write up for this later, because you know most people watch on catch up, so they have that thing. And of course, we've got the Big Dog Behavior Conference going on at the moment as well. And then I'll also be getting this up on the YouTube channel as well, so that'll have an extra hit. Well, amazing. I knew it would be, and thank you for sharing your stuff. I love talking. Everybody I talk to really teaches me something, and you've definitely got my brain thinking about a lot today. And there's been dots that have been joined, and I think looking at people in the group, it's the same kind of thing. So thank you for how you're kind of offering things to us as a community, and it's been an absolute joy.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, for the space, for the group. I think you're just incredible. And every time I watch you having conversations with people, I just learn so much about how you can have just authentic, real, meaningful conversations. So thank you so much for bringing that into every space.
Oh, well, thank you. And, you know, we've just celebrated our 2 years, of course, the group. I don't know where the time goes.
Congratulations.
It's a great point you've made there, actually, which I think something to really bear in mind for all of us. And this is the good thing about these conversations, because I think they're democratizing these conversations, because, you know, anybody who has a lived experience has something to say and contribute. And I think this is really important. And there is nothing new under the sun. I know as a community, we like to claim things, but actually what is unique is an individual's filtering of that information. And that's the gift. And if we stay available to each other and hear those things, we might get closer to understanding the reality for a dog. But guess what? We only know a fraction about the human lived experience, let alone another species. Absolutely. So we have to stay humble, and I think that's important. Well, thank you, darling. Thank you, everybody. We've got lots of people coming up, but because I'm just getting back on my feet, I will tell you names. Why not tell you names? I think it's good. We've got Jack Fenton coming in. We've got Nikki French coming in. The amazing Robert Faulkner-Taylor, Dr. Robert Faulkner-Taylor. He's coming back with his series. He's got Lorna Winter coming in to talk about the amazing amount of data they've got from the Zigzag project. We've got Jane Arden coming in as well, coming in, and Julie Daniels. So they're all under Robert Faulkner-Taylor. We've got Colin Spence's talk that's had to be rearranged coming up as well, and lots of other things. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And thanks again, Sarabi. See you soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.